Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our high-level ministerial event sponsored by the CFS with FAO and the UAE government. Let me ask the CFS chairperson, His Excellency Gabriel Ferrero, to the stage. Please, Your Excellency.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let me start thanking our host, the United Arab Emirates, and FAO for jointly co-organizing with the Committee on World Food Security this ministerial high-level session. Colleagues, the Committee on World Food Security has at its main vision the achievement of SDG 2 to ensure food security and nutrition for all, founded on the bedrock of the human right to adequate food, to fostering a world that is free from hunger and malnutrition, where no one is left behind. To do so, we work in partnerships to transform our agri-food systems towards ones that are inclusive, sustainable, equitable, resilient, protectors of human rights, and that result in healthy, affordable diets produced sustainably. In sum, to food systems that contribute positively to the achievement of all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And this is what the Committee on World Food Security does. Brings together governments, our governments, of 133 countries, also civil society, the private sector, the philanthropy, the whole of the UN system, first and foremost, FAO, IFAD, and WFP, also the IFIs, WTO, the research community, and we all come together to deliberate on key issues and agree on globally adopted guidelines to make our shared vision our reality. And now for more than 4 years, the committee has been working, negotiating, and lastly agreeing last year on voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. Resulting from this 4-year effort, multi-stakeholder consultations, negotiation processes, informed by the scientific evidence provided by the Committee on World Food Security high-level panel of experts, these voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition seek to address malnutrition in all its forms through a very concrete perspective, which is holistic, cross-sectorial, systemic policy coherence. These guidelines are meant to be a point of reference for governments, policymakers, financing institutions, businesses and all stakeholders to develop and implement local, national, regional policies and strategies. They are meant to be the compass, a compass for nationally led efforts towards sustainable food systems that deliver on the right to food. Now it is time to translate what has been agreed at the global level, these policy frameworks, such as the voluntary guidelines, into impact. Today, we first wish to provide a better understanding and awareness of what are these voluntary guidelines that were agreed at the Committee on World Food Security. And second, we seek to learn from the emerging experience of putting these guidelines into action at the country, at the regional, and at the global levels. This is why I'm so pleased, and it's my distinct honor to welcome and to introduce Her Excellency Maryam Al-Mehri, Minister of Climate Change and the Environment of our host country, the United Arab Emirates. Minister, I thank you so much for hosting us, joining us here today. Apart from your impressive personal background, Minister, I'm particularly struck by your publicly declared goal of seeing the UAE's position on the Global Food Security Index advance from the 31st place at present to the first place by 2051. I may be retired by then. But I wish you and the UAE success on your ambitious goal. In partnership with Your Excellency and your team, with the CFS and FAO, We are already working with our government to support the promotion of healthy diets to sustainable food systems here and with your leadership across the region. Thank you once again for your leadership, Minister. Excellency, I invite you to take the floor and please a big round of applause, Minister.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Gabriel. Thank you to the work you're doing at CFS and the whole team. Welcome, everybody, to our high-level meeting under the theme Food Systems Transformation in Action. I did give a lot of speeches yesterday as well, but it's just so wonderful to see this turnout here on day 2 of the Food for Future Summit. This session now really aims to underscore the urgent need to accelerate the transformation of our food systems to meet the global demand for nutritious and healthy food. I thank our partners at the Committee on World Food Security, also the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Thank you so much for being here. Also for joining forces with us to make this meeting possible and for really championing the global priorities of achieving food security and improving nutrition for all. As you are all well aware, despite the global community's drive to meet SDG 2 and ensure zero hunger by 2030, we cannot but feel we are not moving fast enough. Failing to supply sufficient, safe, healthy, and affordable food has put the world on a trajectory to both obesity and malnutrition. Sadly, our current food systems not only have an adverse impact on our health, but are also putting immense pressure on our environmental resources and significantly contributing to climate change. And the UAE is no stranger to challenge. Located in a water-scarce, arid region with some of the world's highest average temperatures, the country simply can't rely on traditional food production to meet its food demand. So we resorted to implementing climate-smart agricultural methods, leveraging innovation, and of course building partnerships. And you will see many of these examples here with us today. So please do take the time to go and have a look around. We're driven by our National Food Security Strategy 2051, and yes, Dr. Gabriel already mentioned the ultimate target that we have. It's also important to mention that our vision is really to become a global hub for innovation-driven food security. Our latest achievement in this space is the launch of the Food Tech Valley, also represented here at Food for Future Summit. So please go and have a look at this initiative. It's going to become a city or a playground or a test bed for high-tech agriculture innovation that aims to improve our food self-sufficiency, especially for hot, arid climates like we have here. On the international front, we seek to help other countries overcoming food security challenges, and for that purpose, we teamed up with the United States to launch the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, also known as AIM4C. This is a global initiative that really seeks to accelerate and increase investments in R&D for climate-smart agriculture. And I'm happy to note that here, Aim for Climate, right now, we have 140 government and non-government partners on board, and we have announced an ambitious target to increase the committed investments in this global initiative from $4 billion at COP26 to $8 billion by the 27th UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, in November this year. This is an absolute must, ladies and gentlemen, because food systems transformation is key to solve climate change issues. Everyone's talking about energy transformation, but food system transformation is also as important. And it's really important that investments are put in the sector for this transformation. And of course, our concern is not merely to provide sufficient food for our people, but also to help them adopt diets that are good for them and the planet. And in this context, we developed the nutritional labeling policy and the national nutrition guidelines as tools that enable consumers to make better choices when shopping for food. Because as you know, each and every one of us also plays a part in the food systems. What you choose at the supermarkets, what you buy, how you prepare food, what ends up in the bin in your household, all plays a role in our food systems. And so I'm proud to say that also yesterday, we launched a bold, first of its kind, community awareness and engagement campaign that addresses the nexus of health, nutrition, and planetary well-being through promoting healthy diets from sustainable food systems. So we launched yesterday Food for Life, and this campaign really aims to help our people connect with food and opt for diets that are safe, diverse, balanced, and nutritious, and that come from sustainable food systems. This is really important to understand that it's not just about ensuring that on your plate you have your macronutrients, but taking it a layer further to understand from where is this food coming from. So our efforts to promote the right choices of food for our community align perfectly with the CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which we are proud to support. And as an effective tool in helping countries integrate nutrition into their national food security and climate plans, the guidelines bring all relevant sectors under one umbrella to build sustainable food systems. We are committed to supporting the implementation of the guidelines in our region and are confident they will go a long way in improving our ability to deliver healthy diets and bring considerable socioeconomic benefits to nations. And as you all know, we're going to have 2 COPs happening in our region, in Egypt this year, in the UAE next year. We want to make sure food system transformation also comes up as a priority area to be discussed and solved. Alone, we can do little, but together we can do so much. So let's work together to achieve a complete paradigm shift in the way we produce, consume, and dispose of food to provide adequate nutrition for people and protect our environment now and for future generations. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for sharing with us your vision and reminding us of the importance of food systems transition together with the energy transition, and for reminding us that transition in food systems is so powerful that it can deliver on the whole set of the Sustainable Development Goals. If we build on the smallholder and family farming and the SMEs and the vibrant producers in the rural sectors, we can end poverty transforming food systems. But we can also deliver on climate, on biodiversity, on soils, and all the set of the SDGs. Thank you very much indeed, Excellency. Thanks also for sharing some of the details of your vision and of your strategy for your country, for the UAE, as well as your commitment and action in promoting healthy diets through sustainable food systems. It is really, really encouraging. And it is our hope to be partnering with your country, and that your country will inspire others across the region and in Africa to take equally bold steps in this food systems transformation. And likewise on climate change, including making sure that food, as you mentioned, food systems transition figures prominently in the COPs that's going to be taking place, hosted by the region in Egypt and in your country. Thank you very much again, once again, Minister. So now we will move to the second segment of this event, where we will be focusing on the voluntary guidelines as a global tool to inform policy formulation, promote cross-sectoral coordination, and support the work of national stakeholders towards sustainable food systems. We will try in this segment to have a deeper dive into the voluntary guidelines, their nature, their content, their objectives, and very specifically on the need for cross-sectoral policy coordination with UN system-wide support where appropriate to help countries progress on the 105 recommendations of the guidelines. For this segment, I'm thrilled to introduce the first of our 2 speakers that are here with us today. We'll kick up the conversation around these voluntary guidelines and its potential contribution to helping transforming food systems. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jessica Fanzo. She is the Bloomberg Distinguished Professor at Global Food and Agriculture Policy and Ethics, who is joining us virtually today. Jessica knows very well the story behind the development of the voluntary guidelines because she was the project team leader of the report of the CFS high-level panel of experts that starts all of our negotiation processes. Jessica, good morning to you. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair. And I'm really sorry I'm unable to be with all of you in person in Dubai. I'm quite disappointed, particularly because it's 3:30 in the morning here in Washington, D.C., and it would be much better to be with all of you. So thank you so much for the invitation to speak. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through why the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition are so important when we think about how countries can transform their food systems. So, as said earlier, there's many challenges that food systems are up against. Malnutrition is rising and the burden is quite massive and universal. Almost 1 billion people go to bed hungry and 2 billion people are overweight and obese. And those numbers really are not improving. And so we have to ask ourselves why that is. We also know that food systems are instigators and victims of climate change. Food systems are contributing roughly 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, accelerating environmental degradation. But food systems also are very much at the whim of climate changes, and it will become much more difficult to produce food in the future and quality food if we don't take climate change action. And last, inequities are deepening and plaguing progress. 3 billion people, as reported by FAO, cannot afford a healthy diet. So taking all these challenges into consideration, there's a real need for guidelines. Evidence-based policymaking requires sound advice, but often policymakers are navigating in the dark on how to manage their food systems, to understand the trade-offs in making decisions. So there's a need for guidelines and tools to help policymakers with a roadmap towards transforming food systems. So let's get into the voluntary guidelines. Well, it started off with a report by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition. And this was published in 2017, the Nutrition and Food Systems Report. In that report, we recommended that the Committee on Food Security consider voluntary guidelines on improving food environments specifically for healthy diets. After many dialogues and conversations that the CFS have hosted, we now have this fantastic publication, the Voluntary Guidelines on Food Systems and Nutrition. So what are they? These voluntary guidelines present a set of science and evidence-based guidelines to achieving healthy diets through sustainable food systems while addressing economic, social, environmental sustainability issues and impacts. Not only does it look at policies, but it also looks at investments and different institutional arrangements to address malnutrition in all its forms from a food system perspective. And of course, as the name suggests, these guidelines and actions within are voluntary and non-binding. So the process was challenging to get to these voluntary guidelines. And the process taught us that words, definitions, and consensus matter. And those things matter a lot. It was difficult for countries to come to consensus on what is a healthy diet, what is an unhealthy diet, what's a nutritious food, what's a food system, what's a sustainable food system. But these definitions matter because they provide guidance and allow for countries to come to consensus on the basics for policy action. The guidelines cut across 6 areas: systematic and systemic, multi-sectoral science and evidence-based approaches, a coherent, coordinated, context-specific and inclusive policies, ensuring accountability, transparency, and participation, healthy and prosperous people and planet, gender equality and women's empowerment, and youth empowerment and engagement. And one of the big issues that the voluntary guideline process struggled with was just the complexity of food systems. This is showing you a framework of the many components of food systems in the middle, ranging from food supply chains and food environments to individual people as part of these food systems. But there's also many outcomes that we want food systems to achieve, as well as many drivers that are shaping and shifting food systems in different directions. Dealing with this complexity and all of the feedback loops and trade-offs that different food systems present and directions that they can go in made formulating the guidelines that much more complex. In the guidelines, there's 105 actions across 7 thematic areas: transparent and democratic accountable governance, food supply chains that are sustainable to achieve healthy diets in the context of climate change, equal and equitable access to healthy diets, food safety concerns, putting people at the center, people's knowledge, their education and information, again, gender equality and women's empowerment, and resilient food systems in humanitarian contexts. So within these 7 thematic areas are a range of actions that countries can take. So why should we care about these voluntary guidelines? And I really like this quote from the World Bank when referring to the previous voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of land tenure. And in the World Bank document, they say, today the voluntary guidelines on land tenure are a true global norm of reference in the governance of land tenure. The guidelines are pioneering, outlining principles and practices that governments can refer to when making laws. Sounds simple, maybe even jargony, but no, they are concrete with real impacts. All of a sudden, we had an internationally negotiated soft law on land tenure, navigating successfully through the global web of interests on land, reaching a common ground. And the voluntary guidelines on food systems do exactly that as well. They are internationally negotiated. The groups came to consensus, member states came to consensus, reaching a common ground of how to move forward on food systems. In the whole process and leading up to the publication of the guidelines, not everyone agreed, but in the whole process, everyone was heard. We also learned that all actors need to engage in the process because their endorsement and the carrying out of the voluntary guidelines is critical. If we don't have that engagement and consensus, they will fall flat. We know that evidence can vary by type and is interpreted in different ways. And that was challenging when coming up with the guidelines. And the globalization. Countries need to now decide which guidelines within the voluntary guidelines are relevant for their context, how they will enact them, who's responsible for taking action, and what impact they want to have. We at Hopkins with Recolto, IIRR, and SEAT Bioversity are carrying out and implementing the voluntary guidelines in 4 countries, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Honduras, and Uganda, but with a human rights lens, using human rights to better integrate the rights of rural producers into country policies and programs, and using the voluntary guidelines as one instrument to do that. And this is a project sponsored by the Swiss Development Corporation. So in my last two slides, so we have these voluntary guidelines, but we also have other political moments. We had the sustainable food systems, or I'm sorry, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Food Systems Summit, COPs, UN Decades of Action on Nutrition, Decades of Family Farming. We have so many moments, but we need to ensure that these moments are not left meaningless. We need concrete actions taken by governments, private sector, CSOs, NGOs, and take these moments, take these voluntary guidelines and put them into action, make investments. And we need to address some of the controversies when it comes time to food systems. We have somewhat of a fractured political environment. We need more investment. We need to build human capacity to carry out complex food systems analysis and action. And of course, we need to cultivate these movements, coalitions, and networks and champion human rights and equity. And that's what these voluntary guidelines are all about. It's addressing these elephants in the room and bringing forth transformation across food systems. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jessica. You may not hear it, but it was a big round of applause to your presentation. And thanks for bringing this in-depth description of what the process leading to the adoption, the agreement around these voluntary guidelines was, and how it may be used by, and are used already by governments. We reminded that it is critical importance that these guidelines are the result of a genuine dialogue amongst various stakeholders within food systems, and that they were agreed by governments at an international committee that brings them into the international soft law sphere. So now it is my pleasure to give the floor to FAO's chief economist, Mr. Maximo Torero. You know him very well. He will provide an overview of the role of FAO in supporting food security policies, formulation, and implementation at global, regional, and country levels, and in supporting the CFS and promoting the uptake of these and other voluntary guidelines. Maximo, the CFS policy agreements cannot come into action without the decisive support from FAO and the rest of the UN system. The CFS and the FAO are the two sides of the same coin. Maximo, it's my pleasure to having you today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I will be very brief so that we can move into the dialogue. But let me raise some important points, and I think Jessica has made a great overview of the process. But this was an extremely complex process because you need to get into consensus. And sometimes that is very difficult, especially with terms which are very complicated. Systems is a complicated issue, and food systems is a little bit more complicated even. And the concept of healthy diets is even complexer. So we need to be very careful in bringing as much as possible evidence on all this terminology that we use, and to restrict ourselves to where we have solid evidence so that we can combine properly the terms. So I'm extremely happy that in these guidelines we refer to healthy diets from a sustainable food system, because that's what we know up to today. And we know that if we access to healthy diets, potentially we could have a sustainable food systems in the 3 dimensions of sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. That's extremely important, because what you are trying to do is a change of behavior, a change of policies, so that consumers can have access to these healthy diets, reduce this number of 3 billion people that today doesn't have access to healthy diets, and that could imply a system which is sustainable, but not by itself. It will require other policies to be in place to minimize the potential trade-offs. So in terms of the way we think at FAO of this, we have an objective function, which is clear here. The objective function is access to healthy diets. That objective functions will create trade-offs, positive or negative. Our hope is that it will create trade-offs which are positive for sustainability. And the SOFI 2019 show exactly that, show that a movement towards consumption of healthy diets will create an improvement in how we use our environment and a reduction in terms of emission. And that's extremely important. And another dimension which is extremely important is that if we are going to achieve consumption of healthy diets, clearly we need to lower the cost of availability of this diversity of foods, and that by definition will require that we reduce food loss and waste, which again we know it will improve and make our world more sustainable and will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, FAO strategic framework is exactly looking at that. Our strategic framework supports the 2030 agenda through a transformation to a more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life, leaving no one behind. Now, we talk about agri-food systems. You talk about food systems because your focus is nutrition, it's healthy diets. FAO looks at nutrition as one of our 4 betters. We have better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. But part of our job is also to look at agricultural activities which are not necessarily directly linked to food, like, for example, fibers, cotton, which create income for people to access to food. That's why we call it agri-food systems. So again, the normative and the language is really important. In the case of healthy diets, it's food systems, because we're looking only at the issue of food. But we also look at access and rural areas development through the agri-food systems. Now, within our goal to help to push forward as much as possible the voluntary guidelines, which were an enormous consensus, and of course, when you want to get into a consensus, sometimes you have to make sacrifices. And sometimes you have to simplify things so that people can agree to. Because CFS is not only government, CFS is civil society, CFS is private sector, it's all the stakeholders together trying to get into this consensus. And that is complex. But we have to complement these guidelines. So we are working in 3 dimensions to help the guidelines that are being developed and are being presented here. The first dimension is, as FAO, we have to work with all the UN agencies which are relevant for these guidelines to bring as much as possible evidence to complement the 105 recommendations of the guidelines. And for that, we have developed and launched, together with CFS, a platform last year that contributes to the UN nutrition member agencies, which provides in one place easy access to a comprehensive set of supported evidence and operational tools for each of the 105 recommendations. And this is a dynamic platform that will keep updating as we move and bring more evidence around. Why is this so important? And let me tell you a very brief story. My country, Peru, was extremely successful a few years ago on reduction of undernourishment. It created a mechanism of budget by incentives. So every region, if they wanted to get their budget allocation, they had to comply of a target in terms of the reduction of malnutrition. But the way the Ministry of Food Security, in that case, which has a different name in Peru, was able to convince the Ministry of Finance was with evidence. Simple thing, they developed a Dropbox folder and they put all the evidence of how much money the country will save if they reduce undernourishment. And that triggered immediately the decision of a ministry, which is the one in the case of my country, which decides all the money allocation on the budget to create this mechanism with very objective indicators on the budget. And that was the success story of why Peru improved so fast in the reduction of undernourishment. Now, the second element where we believe we can support is through our operations in the countries. FAO has offices in most of our member countries, and our regional offices and sub-regional offices, and that's why we are here too. And we can push these guidelines through implementation and through support, technical support, to implement the policy guidelines at the country level, similar to what Jessica was talking in Central America, for example. We have an advantage of having an enormous amount of offices in FAO with huge regional operations that can give this technical support together with the headquarters. One big change that has happened in FAO with the new Director General is that we are no longer FAO in Africa, FAO in Asia, we are one FAO. And we work together to bring all the power that we have at the headquarters, at the regional operations, at the country operations, to push this type of activities. And the last area where we can support is because of the community of practice. We are part of a huge community of practice on nutrition, on systems. We are the hub for the food systems follow-up. We are hosting the hub. And that's where we need to keep empowering these activities and keep empowering these guidelines. So with that, let me stop there and remember that we are here to support the guidelines, and thank you very much for CFS for organizing this event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maximo, for providing us with the perspective from FAO, and especially pointing out that the trade-offs and synergies of food systems transitions for healthy diets, and very especially pointing out that the evidence that brings us a strong business case for investing in food systems transformation. It will deliver on people, it will deliver on planet, but it also delivers economically. Thank you also for reminding us that the whole agriculture and food systems, the agri-food systems, they are part of the same system as well, because the agriculture, even if it's not producing food directly, indeed is generating incomes or making use of natural resources, which is very closely related to food systems as such. And finally, Maximo, we are delighted that the committee will work together with FAO and with the hub that is hosted in FAO for the follow-up of the UN Food Systems Summit to make all this happen by providing the CFS platform for your use, for the use of the hub and the member states ultimately. So with this, we will now move to our segment 3, the third segment of this session, which will be a panel discussion on national and regional actions, plans, and the specific commitments, the ways in which countries and other stakeholders are uptaking their leadership with these voluntary guidelines. Please join me on welcoming, when they step to the podium, the distinguished Minister, His Excellency, Winifred Kayibanda from Uganda, Minister of State for Agriculture. Welcome, Minister. Big round of applause as well to His Excellency, Mr. Pio Wenburst, Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the United Nations in Rome. Ambassador, please join us. I also welcome Hakim Elwer, FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for the Near East and North Africa. Hakim, welcome. And finally, Martin van Nieuwkoop, Global Director for Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank Group. If he's here, because I know he already told us that he may be a bit late, and if he's not, then he will join later. And finally, virtually, we have together with us Anna Scavuzzo. She is the Deputy Mayor of Milan. I hope that she is connected virtually and that everything tech is working well as it did before with Jessica. Welcome, Anna. This panel discussion, as well as the following Q&As, will be moderated by our CFS Secretary, Mr. Chris Hegedorn. Please, Chris, come to the podium and lead this next segment of the discussion.
Hello and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, Gabriel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as the Chair said, I'm Chris Hegedorn. I'm based in Rome as the Secretary of the Committee on World Food Security. It's a privilege to be here with you all today. It's a fantastic group that we have assembled here. And I want to encourage you all, if you haven't seen them, at our booth back here, we have a 2-page summary of the voluntary guidelines, and of course, our CFS website will have all of these documents and others, including links to FAO's evidence platform that Maximo spoke to. We're so inspired to be here in this region where we're seeing such tremendous leadership from those like Minister El Moukheri, supported and led by FAO and you all to develop sustainable diets or healthy diets produced sustainably. And so let me start our panel with an intervention by His Excellency Bwino Fred Kyagulanyi, who is the Minister of State for Agriculture from Uganda. He's going to provide us with an overview of the Swiss-funded project you heard mentioned by our friend Jessica, which is one of 4 pilot countries directly linked to the CFS voluntary guidelines with a focus on human rights, the right to food. The project aims to strengthen participation of rural food producers in decision-making processes that directly affect their human rights, especially the right to food. So Minister, can you please tell us more about how those CFS voluntary guidelines through this project are helping your government strengthen your food system and food security in Uganda? Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I extend warm greetings from Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, and also I wish to extend our gratitude to CFS and also extend our gratitude to the Swiss Agents for Development and Cooperation for extending funding support to the project that I'm going to talk about. I also thank the International Institute for Rural Reconstruction, the institution that is providing technical support to the project. And the project we are talking about is the People-Centered Food Systems Fostering Human Rights-Based Approaches project in Uganda. In my country, the broad objective of this project is to contribute to improving and embedding human rights into policies and programs for improving food systems and food issues among marginalized populations, particularly the rural producers. This project has 5 objectives, and I want, in the interest of time, just to summarize those objectives. 1, to provide information, knowledge, and capacity building necessary for ensuring that the Ugandan government integrates human rights requirements into food systems, policies, and regulations. And 2, to assist in designing frameworks that support implementation of food systems related to related international instruments. And 3, to design and adopt human rights monitoring and accountability mechanisms related to food systems. 4, to increase policy coherence for food systems and rights to food. And finally, to develop a theory-based evaluation of the project so as to document the impact of the project at system level. Now, each of these objectives has associated clear activities and outputs, but due to time limitations, I won't go into each of them. However, it suffices to state that the expected overall impact of the project is that by the end of the project, the human rights, especially the rights to food of peasants and the rural communities, as well as their food security and well-being, will be better protected and ensured. On this note, allow me to make a few comments about the CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. To me, this guideline present recommendations to promote policy coherence and reduce policy fragmentation amongst sectors that impact food systems and nutrition. And as such, the People-Centered Food Systems Fostering Human Rights-Based Approaches project is actually the domestication and implementation of CFS voluntary guidelines on food security and nutrition. So, the latter guides the former. And whereas all policy recommendation is in the CFS voluntary guidelines on food security and nutrition are applicable in my country, the most relevant among them is the one that provides for resilient food systems in humanitarian context. And I say this because my country for decades now, has been a major host and recipient of refugees from many places. So this particular one looks to be very, very relevant to our context. The government of Uganda is playing what I would call an exemplary role in the implementation of the CFS voluntary guidelines on food security and nutrition, and indeed is among the few pioneers in this. First of all, at the time when the guidelines were adopted, my country already had a conducive policy environment for the guidelines to be implemented. And I'll give examples of this. Excuse me. I'll give examples of this. When I talk of a conducive policy environment, I mean the following. One, the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda is explicit on its commitment, on the commitment of the government to improve food security and nutrition. And specifically, there is a provision in the policy directives of the Constitution that clearly states that commitment. Number two, Uganda, at the time of the adoption of the guidelines, had already taken a decision to integrate the SDGs in its national development planning frameworks. Frameworks such as the Third National Development Plan, which is the plan that is currently running. Three, the government of Uganda had adopted specific policies to support food systems, and I have quite a list of such policies. Number four, in my country there is currently what we are calling the parish development model that the government is gearing up to implement, and through which the country aspires to take the whole government to the lowest unit of administration, which is the parish in my country, to ensure equitable and inclusive service delivery at the grassroots level and boost agricultural production and productivity for food security, as well as for ensuring incomes for all Ugandans. And number five, in the last 10 years, the government has prioritized development of supportive infrastructure that can support the objectives of food security, such as roads, electricity, irrigation, and construction of food markets across the country. And finally, the government has unreservedly expressed commitment to working with all stakeholders and ensuring that the pilot people-centered food systems fostering human rights-based approaches project is successfully implemented in the country, as well as ensuring that the guidelines are implemented in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. My mic is not working. Let me welcome Martin van Nieuwenkoop from the World Bank, who we mentioned and welcomed earlier, but great to see you, Martin. I'd like to move to Ambassador Pio Wenhoops from Switzerland, who is the ambassador to the UN Rome-based agencies and whose country has been actively involved in both the promotion and, frankly, the negotiation and preparation of the VGFSN in many ways. Pio, please, you have the floor.
Hello? Can you hear me? Fine. Thank you, Chris. Your Excellency and guests and for who everyone is present here. So thank you for allowing me bringing few words and the greetings of a small group. I came to Dubai accompanied by a small group of young ones from both the region, Switzerland, US and others, that they're pushing for change. They want to bring their own ideas. They want to feel that things are moving. But it's not only them, it's all of us. You know, in Switzerland, we keep asking, almost in our obsessive manner, certain questions related to food and food systems. So if I would like to just express 2 or 3 of them, to allow me to understand why we are so engaged with the CFS and these processes, even though time to time we are frustrated. We know, we say it openly, it's not easy, as everyone is already indicating. Governmental and intergovernmental processes, negotiating processes are always complex, because compromise implies that we accept the winner takes it all sentence, say activity does not exist. And this is something for us Swiss, we know that everything is based on compromise. Now, but the question that I wanted to relate to is, one of those is, for instance, if we would like to ask you, what is the true value of renewed traditions in relation to food that assure that everyone is getting a dignified life, access to food and a dignified life and a sense of belonging? What is the value of it? If we consider food just as a commodity, we cannot see it properly. We cannot calculate it. Or another question that is constantly coming, and now more and more, if we produce where we have a comparative advantage and we ship the goods somewhere else, what are the real and true costs related to this? No judgment, it's simply a question. And do we have the answers today? If we keep having a certain kind of sectoral approaches, we might not find the answer. This is what Maximo was saying. Let's find the data, let's find the evidence of it. More and more we realize that the link between food and determinants of health, including social determinants of health, is massive. It's really massive. And this implies also both the analysis of true cost, but also true values, because actually, if you have a good health, everyone has a good health at entry, you might also decrease your expenditure in time to fixing your health, right? So this is also a newcomer in this discussion, relatively newcomer. And last but not least is a question. FAST, we have here the deputy mayor of Milan. And so you know this very well because you've been working a lot on this. But fast, rapid urbanization, everywhere going, linked still a growing population. What does it mean? What does it mean in changing the way food systems are organized? And what is the possibility and future and role of the young ones in this new world, put it in this way? Job creation and so on. These are discussions that are there, but they're being always treated in a sectoralized manner. So the guidelines, what they're seeking for, and they are not perfect. If you read them, some parts of it are a little bit difficult to understand, because compromise in negotiation means also kind of finding the right words in order that we can agree on something, right? But so even if they're not perfect, they are really launching a new area of working towards in food systems, in the way we want to collect evidence. It's triggering, these guidelines will be triggering more and more changes, also institutional changes. So we start with something. We just mentioned, you mentioned, dear Minister, the project that we are going to support for the implementation for. We start with an entry point. So the rights-based approach is just an entry point. But then at the end, it looks at all the system to see what needs to be done to make things going better, without pretending knowing, being the best. But this is what we like the Swiss. Yes, let's negotiate, let's get to a compromise, let's put down something written, but then let's go on practicality. Let's do something with it. And this is basically the message I would like to give to everyone. Let's do something with it. Maybe a specific one, because I like also to mention that these guidelines are triggering, of course, all sorts of other activities. When we talk about specific actors, women, young ones, and so on, there will be interlinked. All the work that the CFS is doing, I, for instance, in charge to work for the chair, for our chair, in a process, in convergency process, that would hopefully get to a good compromise in finding policy recommendation for the youth engagement with both agriculture, as Maximo says, and food systems. We don't know whether it's going to work. Actually, we were scratching our head for sometimes whether we should do that or not, but this is also part of the Swiss commitment. We don't shy away from something that we know is going to be maybe difficult, but we just do it. And then let's see. Let's try to make things happen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Pio, very much. It's great to hear your views on how important evidence is and the focus on true costs. And of course, we very much welcome Swiss support to the CFS over the years. So now we move to the Deputy Mayor of Milan, who is on this screen. Miss Anna Scavuzzo, buongiorno. We know it's morning there for you, a little later than for Jessica at 4 in the morning, but I notice it's, first of all, it's not typical for us to have 5 men on the stage and no women here with us, but we are committed to gender equality, and we will be having voluntary guidelines negotiated and finalized at our 50th plenary session this October. So we invite you to participate in that. And just to make sure you know, it's not just talk. Our high-level panel of experts, 15-member steering committee, now has more women than men for the first time in its history. And so definitely welcome not only the focus on youth, as Pio said, but on gender equality. So Anna, you're joining us from Milan. She's going to give us an overview of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and areas of convergence with the CFS and its voluntary guidelines. I want to just note that the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is a network comprised of 217 cities globally with 400 million inhabitants. So a very key constituency for all of us. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here together with you, to be here in brackets. But I'm very happy also because I think it's very important also to stress the important role that cities can have in all these issues. And I'm very delighted to have been invited today to this minister event on the CFS voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition, also because I would like also to underline some examples, some key points that can be very useful also to promote the guidelines among cities. And I am particularly glad to take part in this Expo 2020 Dubai. And I would like also to congratulate Dubai for the remarkable success of Expo. I cherish memories of our city of Milan hosting the previous edition of the Universal Exhibition back in 2015, also because it has been an exciting moment for our city and for all the cities of the network, also because Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life brought the world's attention to food, nutrition, and sustainability. And I wish you all the best for your future activities, Connecting Minds, Preaching the Future. I think it can be a very important legacy for Dubai and for all your areas. And I would like to focus this importance also on the exposition, because the legacy of the exposition for us had been both the local food policy and the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, because they were born as legacy of Expo to be a continuation of the energy and the commitment that we put into that event. So the Milan Pact you mentioned is an international agreement among cities from all over the world. Different cities from all over the world can belong to the same network, sharing the same goals, deciding different instruments, different paths to reach the goal. It's very important also because each city is committed to develop a sustainable food system that must be inclusive, resilient, and safe. They can provide healthy and affordable food to all people while mitigating and adapting to impacts of climate change. So each city is very protagonist of its life, everyday life, in a very important alliance between cities all over the world. Among the wide array of actors involved in the food systems, cities are becoming crucial players in the food agenda, not just in Italy, but all over the world in each country. Rapid urbanization, we mentioned before, and the climate crisis are deeply impacting food and nutrition security for most of the world population. And so since 2015, in some way, the pact has been a sort of a referment for a lot of cities. The pact has been signed by over 200 cities. The Milan Pact Secretariat hosted here in Milan within the mayor's office aims to supporting cities wishing to develop more sustainable urban food cities all over the world by fostering city-to-city cooperation and best practices exchange. And I think it's very important to underline that our goal is also to advocate for the role of cities in the global food agenda. And for instance, last July, we were honored to organize the plenary session, City and Local Food System, during the UNFSS pre-summit, focusing on the role of cities as key drivers of the food cities transformation. I think it's very important the awareness of cities in this cooperation we can be part. And I see a close resemblance and complementarity between the scope of the CFS voluntary guideline of food systems and nutrition and the work we have been carrying out over these years. A very deeply connection in this glance on these issues. The guidelines are intended to support governments and relevant stakeholders when designing context-specific policies. And I do see many areas of convergence with our community. As an example, considering the focus area dedicated to equal and equitable access to health diets through sustainable food system and its recommendation, I think about the work we are carrying out about school canteens in the cities of Milan and in different cities all over the world. For instance, in Milan, we have a city-owned company, provides 65,000 meals a day for our children. And so school canteens are a formidable tool in promoting sustainable food consumption, health diets, and fighting food poverty. In the same CFS focus area, an interesting initiative comes, for instance, for another city of the pact, the city of Dakar in Senegal, which promotes the special form of urban agriculture. They call them the microjardin, the microgardening. This technique allows the production of fresh and healthy food also in urban areas in the city, while using a smaller amount of soil and water. And the program targets vulnerable groups in the cultivation, for instance, of these microgardens, such as women and elderly, which are among the most affected by malnutrition. And furthermore, this action contributes to the achievement of SDG number 1, no poverty, SDG number 2, zero hunger, and SDG number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And so you are a focus of activity on the same goals altogether. And likewise, the focus area dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment across the food system in some way can suggest the activity in the city of Metzili in Turkey. The local government are perfectly fulfilled the CFS guideline recommendation to ensure equal opportunities to women, especially in rural areas. The city of Metzili inaugurated the Metzili Female Producers Market, 9 local markets involving 650 female producers. The main goals are to reduce the gender-based barriers by increasing working opportunities for women and encouraging them to a more active participation in society. Another example, another project that is advancing the implementation of the 2030 agenda through the achievement, for instance, of SDG number 5, gender equality, SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG number 10, reduced inequality, from cities in the same direction as government. And there was some example, I can share a lot of them we have a very important annual meeting, annual gathering in which we share examples and we share good practices from different cities. And I think it's very important to have a puzzle of all the activities you can in some way collect, also to describe what movement, what firmity you have among cities. And I see that CFS guidelines as an important asset to further guide our action and enhance our impact towards more sustainable food system. We will therefore spread the research in the Milan Urban Food Policy PAC community, and we in some way want to also spread all the thoughts we can share together with you to the cities of the network. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to have you with us. We hope to see you in Rome, just down the road in October. And it's nice to be reminded that even a global document negotiated in a UN context is as relevant in the cities that you're representing as it is in national capitals. So we have two more distinguished speakers. We have 17 minutes left. I want to leave a little time not only for the chair to close, CFS chair to close, but also to see if there are any questions for our distinguished panelists. So let me move now to our friend Dr. Abdul Hakim Al-Waer, who is the FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for the Near East and North Africa. Over to you, Dr. Al-Waer.
Chris, thank you very much, and thanks for gathering this speakers, distinguished His Excellencies, and our colleague Martin from the World Bank. We also have Milan, Deputy Governor, and thanks Gabriel for joining us on this effort on the World Food Summit here with the UAE government to bring in the attention to key issues that address food security. What I'd like to share with you now with all the global perspective, and you had Maximo already gave you the overall FAO interactions and how we deal with the voluntary guidelines. I would zoom into more a regional perspective of what the Near East and North Africa means and how these guidelines can address main challenges and help the region to overcome some of the challenges. Now, we know the Near East and North Africa region suffers from multiple forms of malnutrition. Maximo highlighted some of the global ones, but there are very specific ones to the region. Prevalence of undernutrition, stunting and wasting among children under 5 years of age is of moderate severity according to international standards, with estimated regional prevalence of stunting at 19.8% and wasting at 7.8%. However, most conflict-affected countries of the region, such as Sudan, Syria, Yemen, display high to very high prevalence of both stunting and wasting in under 5 years children. In addition, in Yemen, anemia affects 61.5% of women of reproductive age from 15 to 49 years old, the highest rate in the region and globally. Now, on the other hand, the majority of countries in the region show high and rising trends of overweight and obesity, which represent increasing risk of factors for diet-related non-communicable diseases, such as some forms of cancer, cardiovascular diseases, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes type 2. The changes in dietary patterns in favor of a calorie-dense and nutrient-poor diet combined with the inadequate physical activity are main contributors to rising prevalence of overweight and obesity, both among children and adults. The rate of adult obesity in the NENA region, 30.2%, is more than double the global average, which is 13%. Whereas overweight, 14.2%, is under, or in under 5 years children, is a high public health issue in the NENA region. Undernutrition is closely linked to conflict today, and protracted crisis in the region. And we should bear in mind that the number of conflicts in the region are increasing in number, but they're also increasing in time, which is a new phenomenon in the world. We used to deal with crises that would last, or conflicts, a year, maybe a couple of years. Now we're talking of decades of ongoing crisis that basically exacerbate the impact. However, lack of capacity of current agri-food systems to deliver safe, healthy, and affordable foods to all is another major driver of current nutrition outcomes. Over half of the region's population cannot afford healthy diet, and over a quarter of the population cannot afford diet that meets only required levels of essential nutrients. And we should bear in mind that most of the countries in the region also rely very much on importing basic foods. The region is exposed to multiple shocks and stresses that exert negative pressure on food systems and increase their vulnerability, with negative consequences for food and nutrition security in the region. The region's agricultural production is limited due to scarcity of water and arable land resources. You've heard Minister Mariam at the opening describing at least UAE, which is not an exception for the rest of the region. Further exacerbated by climate change and rapid population growth and expansion of urbanization. Low productivity, lack of investments in agriculture and innovation are among other limiting factors affecting agricultural production. Import dependency, which I mentioned earlier, is high and is likely going to rise in the future as the food production and consumption gap is expected to increase. Now we should know in general that we're off track for achieving SDG 2 as a region as far as we stand now, and we need to find innovative ways in order to be able to get some achievements towards the SDG 2 by 2030. Natural disasters, conflicts, and protracted crisis affect several countries of the region. COVID-19 pandemic that affected the entire food systems has further aggravated hunger and food security situation. In 2020 alone, and this is the regional SOFI, as we call it, the component of the SOFI describing the region, the number of people facing hunger increased by 4.3 million people compared to the previous year. Food safety and quality is another important issue in the region in relation to both to public health and to enhance trade opportunities, and requires effective food laws and regulations and food control systems. We started a program at the regional office in supporting countries on setting up food safety institutions for monitoring and providing safe food and healthy diet for the region. There's no healthy diet and good nutrition without adequate food safety. Let me just go to the last part of my intervention here. Sustainable agri-food systems have a fundamental role to play in promoting healthy diets and improving nutrition for all. Food systems transformation towards healthy diets needs to be carried out using a multi-sectorial approach, addressing the underlying socio-economic and political causes of malnutrition. Integrated policy responses and link health, nutrition, social protection, education, environmental, food, and agricultural policies need to be well coordinated. And here where the voluntary guidelines provide an excellent tool and an effective tool to the countries in the region to align their needs to the voluntary guidelines. And the voluntary guidelines of food systems and nutrition, of course, is a tool that used by the governments and the policymakers in their actions towards achieving sustainable food systems and improved nutrition. CFS guidelines has 6 focus areas, as we all know them. I'll not go through them. But they are used by the governments to align their targets towards achieving food security. I will stop here, Chris, and see if we have any other interventions later. But our program for the region at the moment supporting the countries, together with the support from the headquarters on volunteering for the voluntary guidelines, and use them to drive their own national policy on food security, and of course also looking at the agri-food systems as explained earlier. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abdul Hakim. Not only do we applaud your leadership here in the region, we also appreciate you flagging how important conflicts are and how impactful they are on everything from food prices to people's security. Now we have our last speaker today on the stage, but we also have a video from Agnes Kalibata, which we'll show after Martin van Nieuwkoop, Global Director of Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank, gives us his perspectives on not only the voluntary guidelines, but priorities for food security and food system transformation. Over to you, Martin.
Very good, and thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me to this panel. And sorry for being late at a meeting with the minister. So I can keep it short. I mean, let me tell you what I like about the guidelines and what I don't like about the guidelines. So what I like about the guidelines is that they really point towards also, everybody talks about food insecurity, food security, but I think the importance for us is where I'm sitting, is the qualitative dimension of food security, nutrition security. And of course, we know that 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. And I think very few people actually know that. And I think it's through the voluntary guidelines that this is being put in the spotlights. We in the bank think, those voluntary guidelines are very valuable. So we also applying them as a reference in the preparation of our project to make sure that our projects are nutrition sensitive. We do about $4 to $5 billion in lending every year. So I hope, that through our portfolio and our engagement with the countries, we actually show governments on how those voluntary guidelines can be translated into operational terms and make an effect on the ground. I think we need to go a step further here, Chris, and I would like to propose you to that. The point is that the absolute poverty line is $1.90 a day, okay? And that $1.90 a day is basically a calorie-informed poverty line. So the cost of a healthy diet is about, the FAO has done the analysis, Maximo and his team, $3.7 a day. So I think there's a case to be made, to revisit those poverty lines and make sure that they are nutrition informed, so that also the social safety programs that countries deploy can be better nutrition informed. And I think if you could achieve that, Chris, I think you will even see more impact of those voluntary guidelines. So I'm offering that we actually work with you on that, to make that happen. Now, what do I don't like about the voluntary guidelines? I don't like about the voluntary guidelines that they're voluntary. We also worked in the World Bank on the principles of responsible agricultural investment after the food price crisis. They're also voluntary. If you look at the sustainability indexes that are being produced, and a major one came out 18 months ago by the Wall Street Journal, that actually look across sectors, thousands of publicly traded companies, and they made the top 100 of the most sustainable companies based on ESG standards, okay, which are more the binding standards. There was only one food company in the top 100. Food is about 12 to 15% of global GDP. There should be 12 to 15 companies in that top 100. So that shows there's a major gap here. The World Benchmarking Alliance, and the bank actually worked closely with them, came out with a report on, they assessed also across various sectors, but they also zoomed in on the agribusiness sector. They looked at 350 companies, agribusiness companies, and scored them on ESG and nutrition standards. A few facts. 73% of companies had a sustainability plan, but only 23% had real targets. 80% of the companies, didn't have any plans or commitments, to improve the accessibility and affordability of nutritious food. So there's a major gap here. So what can we do to actually move from voluntary guidelines, from the voluntary principles of responsible agricultural investment? So how can the CFS, the World Bank, and the World Benchmarking Alliance actually join hands and forces to actually see whether we can make those guidelines and the compliance with ESG standards, to mainstream that, and that's another proposal I want to put forward to you to work on that together moving forward. Thank you.
Martin? Hello? Testing? Okay, Martin, thank you. We love challenges and look forward to working with you on that, because you do bring a lot of firepower as the bank to these discussions, and we will certainly put that on our agenda. Hakeem?
Yeah,
do you
just
want
a
to say
quick
something
question
quickly?
maybe to Martin, because he doesn't like the guidelines to remain voluntary. Maybe one way to turn them into compulsory is through the financing institution. If it becomes a condition for financing, like the World Bank and the others, then there's an obligation for countries to have them on board before they can seek finance.
Well, the spring meetings are coming up. Go ahead, Martin.
So the point is, those ESG standards apply to companies. So, but definitely something worth to kind of exploring that.
Okay. Great. I mentioned we have a video which we're going to play quickly. This is Agnes Kalibata, who many of you know, Special Envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit previously with AGRA. If we can show that now, super. The team is on it. Let me thank the tech team.
Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to this ministerial dialogue. I want to thank the government of the United Arab Emirates, FAO, and the Committee on World Food Security for your leadership in convening this timely discussion. The UN Food Systems Summit took place in September 2021 after 2 years preparatory process, which was evident that all stakeholder groups across the globe had been engaged in seeking ways to transform our food system as a catalyst for achieving the SDGs by 2030. This is also a huge opportunity for me to thank you for being part of the UN Food Systems Summit. We achieved so much together. In addition to a clear direction from the Secretary General's Statement of Action, 163 member states put forward statements, 77 of them by heads of states. We have over 110 pathways put forward today that lay out a clear vision for successful food system implementation. We have over 30 multi-stakeholder coalitions working with different countries to help resolve specific challenges to these countries. Lastly, but not least, we elevated public discourse on food systems. Our Good Food for All campaign and communications around it touched over 2 billion people with a simple but very clear message. Improving our food systems is key to achieving all our global goals for people, planet, and shared prosperity. To accelerate action towards more inclusive, sustainable, and equitable, resilient food systems, and to achieve all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we require the participation of each and every one of us, not just governments, not singular stakeholders, civil society, private sector, youth, women, and all of us. Our efforts must come together. At the heart of all these efforts, it is clear that the interplay between science and policy needs to be amplified. Policy needs to be anchored in scientific evidence and knowledge, and in return, knowledge and science need to be relevant, useful, and usable for policymakers. At the summit, we saw Africa present a common position on food systems transformation, with commitment anchored on the work of the Food Systems Summit action tracks. The continent's leaders agreed to support the implementation of national pathways on the following entry points. Governments agreed to focus their efforts on strategies and approaches that reflect national demands and local needs. They also agreed to use tools and data gathered across sectors to ensure links between homegrown scientific evidence and policy direction. In addition, they agreed to build on existing monitoring and evaluation models, as well as developing complementary instruments to support appropriate implementation capacities to deliver on the food systems. What does this mean going forward? It means that, for one, there's an opportunity to bridge the gap in our policy and investment fronts. Two, we have an opportunity to explore and embrace innovation in policy, in production, in financing, and many other areas. Three, we have a chance to be inclusive of gender, indigenous people, youth, women, and many other people. And finally, governments and other stakeholders have an opportunity to adopt their national pathways and strategies to areas that science indicates have the highest value and high impact. The CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition provide a comprehensive overview of the areas we should be focusing on as a global community working at national level. There is room for everyone, from governments to sustainable supply chains, from equitable access to healthy diets to food safety and education, from gender equity to resilience. In building on existing mechanisms and tools, we spare ourselves from reinventing the wheel, but we also allow ourselves to expand on what works for our countries and different contexts. I believe that the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, among other policy products of the CFS, provide areas that are yet to be fully exploited by governments, partners, and various stakeholders. As we shift from national pathways to actionable strategies and investment plans, we need to put these to full use. As we deliberate today and make commitments towards the food system transformation, I urge you to be bold, to be ambitious, and to be unapologetic about exploring different ways to contribute to the 2030 agenda. Sustainable food system transformation is our game-changing solution to achieving SDGs. You can count on me, and you can count on the institution that I lead, AGRA, to support the rollout of these guidelines and other products that can change farmers' lives here on the African continent. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me today, and I wish you good meetings.
Thank you. That's a great message. And we're close to wrapping up. The CFS chair will give some final remarks, but I did promise that our friend and future partner, Ms. Leila Abdel-Latif, who is the Director General of the Emirates Nature WWF, can say a few words about the campaign that they launched yesterday. You heard the minister speak to it and know just how important that is to the UAE and in partnership with the UN FAO. So please, pleasure to see you. Please, a couple minutes, Leila, we'll hear from you and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you so much. And Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, thank you for allowing me to participate. It's very evident from today's conversation that there's a lot of collaborative effort and discussions really going towards this effort. And as heading up Emirates Nature in association with WWF, we also truly believe as WWF that there should be a focus on healthy diets and sustainable food systems. As Her Excellency Mariam Al-Mahari had mentioned, yesterday we had launched a campaign on healthy diets and sustainable food systems with the Ministry of Health and Prevention, Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, FAO, ourselves. And really the purpose of this campaign is to drive and create that awareness with the general public, with our corporate and government partners in the UAE, and as well create those opportunities for further outreach, collaborations with our local farmers, with our community partners. It's all about also understanding what are those drivers towards that behavioral. Allowed us to really identify how can we integrate this policy tool essentially at a national level. And I think that's the goal that you're trying to achieve here. It's the goal that we're trying to achieve as WWF as well. It's really looking at how do we take those recommendations, take those insights to really integrate that multi-sectoral approach, to bring on board the various actors, to understand how do we transform those food systems essentially at a local level, What are the learnings that we can bring as well as a local level to our partners globally and really pilot out those voluntary guidelines efficiently in the UAE? So I'd just like to thank you for that, because that has been really insightful and useful in our endeavors with this campaign, Food for Life, and we look forward to continuing this collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila. And more evidence of just how important it is for us to give voice to civil society in particular, and just what a critical role is for implementation, not just for governments and international organizations, particularly the right to food as expressed by the minister from Uganda. So we're going to wrap it up. We're going to have the CFS chair come up and give some closing remarks, and then we'll call it quits for today.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for your moderation, and thank you everyone for attending this very exciting meeting. And what has made this meeting exciting, this session, is the presence of different nature of stakeholders, from governments to international partners, government as well, to regional specialist agencies, regional director from FAO, and the international financing institutions, majors or deputy majors, cities, scientists, and civil society. 5 takeaways I take from this conversation. The first one, these guidelines are an empowering tool. They are a safe space because they have been agreed globally by governments with the full participation of stakeholders. This safe space empowers ministers, empowers majors, empowers civil society, the business community to move ahead on issues that are not easy, that sometimes bring complex political economies. Second takeaway, when these global agreements, these empowering frameworks are taken by ministers, such as the minister from Uganda and many others around the world, and they domesticate, they adapt to your national circumstances, to your national priorities, these voluntary guidelines, then they bring change, and they may empower your action in your country levels. My third takeaway, we have seen the transformative power of local governments, of territories, from communities to national governments, from national governments to regional organizations, and to the global level. We need to combine bottom-up and the top-down, from local to global and from global to local. My fourth takeaway, when we integrate such frameworks into our dialogues between partners, between Switzerland and Uganda and other countries, for instance, these also provide common language, common priorities, and a common space for dialogue. And finally, it may be the time to think about innovative ways to move ahead, to bring them further into action. When we see the international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, integrating these voluntary guidelines and requesting them to be moving into the agenda of ESG investments, this means setting up the incentives to our companies, to our governments, to all stakeholders to really bring change to our business models, to our policies, and to all of our action. So thank you very much indeed once again for being here today. Thank you, the United Arab Emirates government. Thank you very much indeed, FAO. It is wonderful partnering with such an amazing partners. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.